The Strange World of Lewis Carroll. For many years, literary scholars and scientists have puzzled over the secrets of two children's fairy tales. Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. Meanwhile, their creator Lewis Carroll himself lived in some strange world, where everything was turned upside down and unpredictable. To begin with, there was no Lewis Carroll. There was a shy and eccentric Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, a modest English mathematician and logician. He worked first as a librarian, then, having received the title of professor, taught mathematics and logic at Oxford College Christ Church, was very keen on other exact sciences and was not going to write fairy tales at all. But everything went differently. One day in the courtyard of the college, Dodgson saw girls playing croquet. The girls were the daughters of the Dean Liddell. Just a few days later, they became friends with a lonely mathematician. Dodgson willingly played various games with them, most of which he invented himself, and took the girls for a walk. Friday, July 4, 1862 was a magical day, not only for the Liddell sisters, but also for all English literature. Although, it all started too traditionally. At that time, it was fashionable to go on picnics or make small trips. Adults usually took children to show them vicinities. So Dodgson and his friend Robinson Duckworth decided to take a boat up the river to the ruins of the ancient monastery of Godstow. And they took the Liddell sisters with them. Lorina was then 13 years old, Alice, Dodgson's favorite, was 10, and Edith was 8. Dodgson himself at that time was 30 years old. Friends wanted to explore the old well, which recently found by their common friend, a young priest Charles Brout. According to legend, this well has healing properties. In immemorial times, the patroness of Oxford, St. Friedsvide, fled to these places, fleeing the lustful encroachments of King Alga. Alga pursued her, but the Lord punished him with blindness. However, the beautiful Friedsvide was so holy, that she took pity on him. St. Margaret appeared to her, and showed a healing well, whose water could bring back sight. Since then, for centuries, the sufferers have come to the magic well. But by the 19th century, the well had collapsed and overgrown. It was all the more interesting to see what Prout had dug out. The trouble was, that the girls were not interested in the old legend. They were bored, and the restless Alice began to demand to tell more interesting story. So, in the middle of the river, was born a fairy tale for Alice, called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Dodgson did not intend to print the story. Having a little edited the text, he rewrote it in large clear letters, and presented it to Alice for Christmas, in 1864. He also drew drawings himself as best he could. Naturally, Alice was proud of such an adult present. Alice's little friends read the present, and one day one of them said to Dodgson, "It's inconvenient to read the same book to everyone, it's necessary that there be a lot of such books." And Dodgson decided to publish a book. But he did not want to publish the book under own name. The book was published in 1865 under the pseudonym of Lewis Carroll. And since then, this Carroll, as the author complained, played a dirty trick with him. It began with the fact that someone found out his real name. The upshot was that no one called Dodgson by his own name. After all, it was only he himself who was sure that the writing of fairy tales for an Oxford teacher was undignified. All Englishmen who loved to read, thought differently. The book from the first days became a cult. There were many fans of Alice. The book entered the school course. Even Queen Victoria herself read her enthusiastically. It was just a completely unplanned miracle. The second tale did not yield the first. Both books have become desktop and iconic. Moreover, the British consider the book about Alice's ridiculous, paradoxical and unpredictable adventures to be one of the best books in Britain. And how many scientific views, tasks and hypotheses in Carroll's fairy tales. It's even inconvenient to sometimes call them fairy tales. Its images and situations are used by the most reputable scientists in order to more clearly explain modern scientific ideas about the world. Particularly, often refer to the texts of Carroll, his countrymen, the British. Thus, the episode, when Alice in Wonderland increases to an enormous size, then rapidly decreases, is often cited by modern physicists as a graphic illustration of the theory of expansion and contraction of the universe. The distinguished mathematician Sir Edmund Whittaker, in his book Eddington's Law in Philosophy of Science, published in Cambridge in 1951, seriously describes the decreasing universe, recalls Alice's funny decreases. And for more than 100 years, Oxford educators, telling students about an infinitely decreasing sequence in mathematics, have given an example of endless dreams of Alice and the Black King. Alice sees the king in a dream, who sees Alice in a dream, who sees the king, and so on. It's interesting that changing in size, Alice is trying to recall at least some very stable concepts, for example, the multiplication table. What could be more sustainable? But 4 multiplied by 5 she turns out to be 12, and 4 multiplied by 6 is 13. Is it a paradox again? Not really. The fact is that Carroll uses different number systems. After all, if Alice is changing in size, even the numbers change in size. In the hexadecimal number system, using as base 18, 4 multiplied by 5 will actually be 12. And 4 multiplied by 6 is 13. In the number system with base 21. Carroll's contemporaries were perplexed, why do all these different systems need? However, they are very useful for scientists of the 20th century, including for computer modeling. Interestingly, the very construction of fairy tales about Alice, which turned out to be so unusual for Carroll's time, is now perceived as absolutely clear. This is the virtual world of a computer game. The door opens. Behind it there are 2 more doors. It is necessary to choose which one to enter. Behind those doors are the following. Again, you need to make a choice. The mirror construction multiplies, breaks into pieces and reassembled into a whole. Heroes advance to the goal or get stuck. The virtual world fascinates, and the hero is unable to get into the real world. Then, in the days of fairy tales, the pages of fictional books could not be carried away so deeply as the current pages of a computer. But Carroll's fairy tales were fascinating, because they acted on the subconscious, like modern computer games. Albert Einstein's followers take great interest in Carroll's tales. They always pay attention to the fact that the storyteller, a mathematician, describing the fall of Alice in a rabbit hole with evenly increasing acceleration, in a certain sense, anticipated the famous mental experiment in which Einstein described the fall of an imaginary elevator, to explain some aspects of his theory of relativity. As an illustration of the provisions of the relativity of physics, is the Black Queen's senseless run, when she explains to Alice the laws of the looking glass. Well, here, you know, you have to run as fast just to stay in the same place. If you want to get to another place, then you need to run at least twice as fast. In the chapter Looking Glass House another paradox arose. Can Alice, a living girl, drink weird milk? Alice decided that, no. Naturally, neither Carroll nor Alice could prove it. Only in 1957, 2 American physicists of Chinese origin, Li Tao and Yang Zenin, received the Nobel Prize for theoretical work on antimatter, that is a substance having an asymmetric arrangement of atoms. Their work has confirmed that weird milk cannot really be drunk. And Alice will not even be able to sip such milk. As soon as she touches it, both of them, like antimatters, will explode. All these discoveries, Carroll was able to predict even in those days. No wonder that fans considered him almost a prophet. The eccentricities of the gentleman of the Victorian era, his love for the logical game and the fantastic paradoxes, were explained by the desire to share his knowledge in coded form. It is not surprising that even the very life of Carroll, a respectable and sensitive Victorian priest, has become the object of study, worship and even description.